Welcome, dear friends and supporters of the Afar Nation. My name is Ahmed, and I'm thrilled to be your MC again this year. And I want to thank you so much for attending this year's EANC conference. This gathering brings together distinguished guests from various Eritrean opposition groups and experts who will consider pathways forward for the democratic transition of Eritrea. Our agenda today includes presentations by activists as well as experts. We also have some fun for you, including delicious Afar cuisine and a cultural presentation hosted by the local Afar community. Among key points for our discussion this evening are establishing an autonomous Dankalia within a united, decentralized Eritrea, facilitating dialogue with international and regional stakeholders to promote this cause, the role of the diaspora in promoting Afar autonomy, and the shape of Eritrea's future democracy. Just before calling on speakers, I want to acknowledge and thank Afar friends who are joining us through Zoom today. I want to acknowledge especially the appreciated presence of Mr. Nagash Osman, Chairman, Eritrea National Council for Democratic Change, Mr. Nuruddin Abdulkalir, rights activist and friend of the Afar, Mr. Gareb Bulhadir, National Representative, Council of Eritrea, Mr. Jonas Waldu, Biotic Yakal, Teddy Meng Sab from Fasil, Abdurrahman Bohashim, human and political rights activists. After the speakers, we will also have a Q&A section. We also have a statement of solidarity from Mr. Tekber Bayani. I will call on Angie to read this much appreciated demonstration of support. Our first speaker today is Ahmed Mohamed. He is the current president of Eritrean Afar National Congress, an indigenous Afar political opposition group dedicated to autonomy for Afar people in their homeland of Dankalia, Eritrea. He is a co-founder of Afar humanitarian organization Can Go Afar Foundation and an admired tireless worker for the cause of Afar people. It is my pleasure to introduce him now. Thank you very much. Well.
Can you hear me well now? Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Assalamu alaikum. So for those Afar ummataka lan nani kali ilo salama connection stafaina waisa rahiya rakakai dolatak Djibouti hadataku Faraka ki hadataku hinna itonna Dankali hadanne katatah tanitan tobukoku. Assalamu alaikum sinikunna. ادينا انه نيمي سنجح لوي الله اللي تكناويا ابنها نيمي عالم ما تدعوتني نكاكا سندونغولو كه برجي وايتناي سنكنا نكه اللي توي تحتين هب نجح لو كني مسبتها قد جاي ابري برنامج انجليزي فتبلو مسبتها بلدنا نلكتاتاي. Thank you, brothers and sisters who are joining us here live, as well as those who are joining us in Zoom. I know very distinguished of our friends and colleagues that are joining us. I know Professor EK is in audience, and we also want to thank our colleagues and our legal counsel, Professor Joseph Magnet, for joining us. I have on my left side, Brother Wade. We call him Wade, Warren Creeds. He's a Can Go Afar president of Can Go Afar Foundation. We'll have his bio and more details will be read by Ariel a little later on. But I just want to acknowledge your presence. We are so humbled. We are so grateful that you could join us tonight. Again, I would like to welcome everyone, dear friends and supporters, our invited guests. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight. We are delighted to see everyone join us through Zoom. Also, we wanted to welcome those who are joining us in the region, like I said, in Afar, in Djibouti, in Yemen, in Ethiopia, and the Afar regional state especially. As we do traditionally, I want to start by introducing a brief history of Afar, as we traditionally do in the conferences like this. The Afar people are ancient, linguistically and culturally homogenized indigenous people in Africa who live in an area known as the Afar Triangle, encompassing the modern states of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, going back to 5,000 years. Presently, the Afar population is estimated approximately 3 to 4 million people, distributed across these three countries. Like many nations in Africa, the Afar nation and their traditional territories in the Horn of Africa were the subject of the European colonization during the late 19th centuries, known as the Scramble for Africa by the European nations. This political division of the Afar people resulted in their current separation across the three sovereignties, like I said, in Djibouti, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. For centuries before the arrival of the European colonialists, the Afar nation had occupied its traditional territories and maintained durable communities. As self-governing indigenous nation, the Afar governance and authorities were organized by 5 Afar sultanates famously known as the Ausa, Tajorra, Rahaita, Gobat, and Biru. The Afar sultanates, these Afar sultanic entities autonomously governed the Afar societies, both culturally and politically, exercising their indigenous customary laws, legal system. They exerted power over their territories beyond the colonial borders and resolved conflict in accordance with the Afar Mad'a. It's called the Afar customary law. It's called Mad'a. So the Afar sultanates in the region have signed. Please. Yeah, you're doing good. So next slide. The Afar sultanates in the region have signed over 19 independent. They have signed 19 agreements with French and the Italians, recognizing the Afar independent authority and sovereignty in the region. These agreements, which affirm the Afar control over the area, are documented in the book called Al-Manhal by the late Afar scholar Dr. Hashim Gamaluddin. One of the regions of the Afar Triangle, which is the focus of our conference tonight, is Dankalia. Dankalia is a traditional Afar homeland situated within the state of Eritrea in the northeastern part of the Afar Triangle. The region along the Red Sea coastal line and the Dankalia region lies along the Red Sea coastal line, is rich in natural resources. Dankalia's coastline and historic villages were the first visited by the early Portuguese expedition, the likes of Turkish Empire, later on by the European colonialists. The strategic coastal waters include international shipping lanes, ports with significant capacity. These resources are sought after by both superpowers and regional governments. My name is Ahmed Mohamed. I'm honored to be speaking to you today in my capacity as President of Eritrean Afar National Congress, the EANC. Our organization, the Eritrean Afar National Congress, has been mandated by the Eritrean Afar leadership in exile, traditional Afar leadership, youth groups, our refugees across the region, to vigorously fight against policies of colonization, ethnic persecution, marginalization by the current authoritarian Eritrean government and the PFDJ. Our unwavering mission and commitment are to restore the Afar nation's internal self-determination in Dankalia, reclaim the Afar autonomous rule, and reinstate the Afar nation's indigenous and territorial rights to natural resources, our cultural identity, in Dankalia. These rights face severe threats and are being relentlessly destroyed by the current Eritrean regime. So our conference is appropriately named Autonomous Dankalia within Eritrea, within United Eritrea. During my presentation, I will argue for the recognition of Dankalia in Eritrea as an autonomous region within the Eritrean Federation. At our previous conferences last year, we introduced a constitutional document called the Afar model, which advocates for the decentralized, democratic constitution. This model aims to move Eritrea away from authoritarian military rule of the PFDJ towards power-sharing constitutional framework for all regions of Eritrea. The Afar model received support from various Eritrean political leaders, individuals. Tonight we have the Afar model with us, and I want to invite you all to read it and consider endorsing it. I would ask Ali if you can share the Afar model document to yes, not that one. I have copies here with you. Musa, if you can أوراق تيكل إن هي أفار موديل ده استديا إذا ما حد ما أوراق مفي أفار موديل. The idea of an autonomous Dankalia is an extension of the Afar model, specifically calling for autonomy for the Afar nation in Dankalia within the framework of the Eritrean state. Let me begin by bringing to your attention the unprecedented human rights violation and the crisis faced by the Afar people in Eritrea. If you can go to the next slide. So the human rights violation. So our team of lawyers, led by Professor Joseph Magnet and Warren Creech, have interviewed hundreds of eyewitness testimonies and first-hand accounts of human rights violations. We have compiled excerpts from the 3 different United Nations Special Rapporteurs on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and their investigative teams. The investigations reveal widespread human rights violation, systematic violations against the Afar people in Eritrea, which constitutes crimes against humanity. And we have also a printout of the UN findings. It's called the human rights document that you have in your hand, Musa. I want everyone to have that as well, to read through it as I go through the human rights violation. So the decade-long and extensively detailed investigation reported by UN Special Rapporteurs and experts revealed the unique nature of the crimes against the indigenous Afar people in Eritrea. The Eritrean government and its officials have systematically destroyed the Afar people as a group, discriminating against them based on race, culture, and economics. They have prevented the Afar from carrying out their traditional way of life, destroyed their economic livelihood, restricted their access to strategic resources such as fishing, animal husbandry, in a form of collective punishment. This is evident in the actions taken by the Eritrean government. Throughout these human rights violations, there are systematic and violent crimes that are reported by the UN investigation. And here are some of it, reported by a special rapporteur. And it reads, the Afar are subjected to extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearance, torture, rape, as well as destruction of their traditional means of subsistence, and livelihood and businesses. This is said by United Nations Special Rapporteur Sheila B. Keterwood, Report 2013, paragraph 75-78. Eritrea has systematically violated fundamental rights and freedoms of the Afar people. UN report, UNSR reports 2014 reads on page 4. The killings of Afar have triggered displacement from their lands within the country across borders to Djibouti, to Ethiopia in Djibouti, posing great difficulty to the Afar livelihood as they depend on their traditional lands for sustenance as indigenous ethnic group. UNSR Sheila Keterwood. Eritrean officials have committed the crimes of persecution, crimes against humanity, against the Eritrean Afar population since 1991. UN Commission of Inquiry, Report 2015, from paragraph 1121 to 1122. The government of Eritrea engaged in a campaign of killings, arbitrary detentions, and enforced disappearance targeting the Afar civilians, forced eviction, and forced relocation. The Commission also has a reasonable ground to believe that Eritrean officials have intentionally and severely deprived Eritrean Afar of fundamental rights contrary to international law on ethnic ground. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry, Report 2016, paragraph 292-295. Eritrean state seized Afar land territory without their consent to be used by the Arab coalition supported anti-Houthi military campaign in Yemen, as well as construction of permanent military base at Asab International Airport and new permanent seaport adjacent to it. The militarization has killed, injured Eritrean Afar as they carry out their traditional economy as fishermen. The UNSR, this report was issued by UNSR Daniela Kravitz, Report 2017. As you can see, the persistence and systematic persecutions of Afar population in Dankalia have been widely reported by various special rapporteurs. There's more. Eritrean government continues to actively pursue a land policy which has legitimized forcible displacement and dispossession of indigenous Afar population. Its policies has led to arbitrary and uncompensated evictions. The Afar people's effort, as you see here tonight, to seek compensation for dispossession of their traditional lands and during the construction of the military base in Asab were stifled. It was obviously denied by the Eritrean regime. This is report by SR 2018, paragraphs 20 and 23. The Afar are one of the most disenfranchised communities in Eritrea. For several decades, they have been subjected to discrimination, harassment, arbitrary arrest, disappearance, violence, widespread persecution. This is a report by UNSR Dr. Mohamed Babakir, Report 2023. This is the most recent special rapporteur in Eritrea. We want to thank the UNSR. We want to thank UN Special Rapporteur Dr. Babakir and all previous UN Special Rapporteurs for clearly identifying the Eritrean regime for what it represents: a violent, tyrannical, unhinged, despotic dictatorship. So these grave human rights violations and persecutions have led to more than three-quarters of Afar populations seeking refuge in neighboring countries, which you will hear from Brother Wade in detail in his presentation. So these refugees have been in Ethiopia alone. There are 100,000 Afar refugees and internally displaced people all around the Afar regional state in Ethiopia. The UNHCR and other aid organizations are actively working to provide support for the Afar refugees in neighboring nations in Djibouti and Yemen. Ladies and gentlemen, Eritrea's policies and actions are reminiscent of colonization, which goes against the expectation of the state that fought to liberate itself from oppression. The government's stated priorities for citizens of well-being or national development seems disconnected from its action. Instead, the state of Eritrea operates as a rogue military regime with the goals of displacing the Afar people, seizing their ancestral land, exploiting their natural resources through violent means. The Afar political and traditional leaders have united in response to pressing, grave, and existential threat against their people in Eritrea. They have unified their voices and political forces to demand the emancipation of the Afar people from the ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity. The Afar of Eritrea are resolutely calling for their political forces to demand the Afar of Eritrea are resolutely calling for their political, cultural, human, and indigenous rights to be respected and safeguarded within Eritrea. They assert their inherent and inalienable right as indigenous nation to exercise self-determination and autonomy over the Dankalia region as part of decentralized, multinational, and constitutionally democratic Federation of Eritrea. The call of Afar autonomy in Eritrea is backed by the international law and supported by oppressed people worldwide. The African Charter of Human and Political Rights, the Banjul Charter, states that the oppressed nations such as the Afar people have the right to exist and that they have unquestionable and inalienable right to self-determination. They are entitled to freely determine their political status and pursue their economic and social development according to the policies that they have freely chosen. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People recognizes that the rights of indigenous people, including the rights of Afar to self-determination, this right includes the ability to exercise autonomy or self-government in matters concerning their internal local affairs. Next slide. Next. Yeah. Just recently, we signed a memorandum of understanding to strengthen the representation of Afar, nation of Eritrea. This was achieved by signing a memorandum of understanding with another Afar political group. We have also signed MOU, memorandum of understanding, with the highest traditional authority, the Sultanate of Bidu, which governs vast Afar territories that transcends colonial borders. In discussion with our Eritrean opposition groups, and colleagues in the diaspora, we learned about their concerns regarding the Afar self-determination and how they view the implementation of the Afar autonomy in Dankalia. They have consistently emphasized that importance of respecting Eritrea's sovereignty and upholding the sovereignty of our nation in Eritrea as a fundamental principle. In my conclusion, the Afar nation has a strong historical basis of claiming special autonomy in Dankalia. The indigenous Afar people have unique culture, language, and consider Dankalia their traditional territory with pre-colonial and defined borders. The Afar five sultans have well-documented history of self-governance recognized by international powers such as the Ottoman Turks, the Italians, the French, through peace treaties and mutual agreements with neighboring nations and tribes. The systematic marginalization of the Afar people in Eritrea is undeniable. The persistent persecution faced by the Afar in Eritrea pose an existential threat. Eritrea's policies, can you go ahead, please? Yeah, next slide. Next. Yeah. Eritrea's violent policies cannot be allowed to suppress the Afar people's legitimate demands for autonomy in Dankalia. Despite enduring unprecedented human rights violation and facing unique form of repression and policies of assimilation, the Eritrean Afar remain steadfast in their commitment to sovereignty of Eritrea. We have reassured our colleagues in the democratic opposition that we stand with them in their struggle for a more just and democratic Eritrea. Acknowledging the autonomous region of Dankalia within united Eritrea is not only the right course of action to address the historic grievances of the Afar people, but it is also a critical component for ensuring our sovereignty and shared struggle toward democratization and liberation of Eritrea's population from PFDJ. It is imperative for democratic opposition groups to collectively recognize and support the political, cultural, economic aspirations of the Afar people in Eritrea. This support is crucial in granting the Afar the autonomy and freedom to leverage their traditional resources to combat poverty, disenfranchisement, and marginalization since Eritrea is independence in 1991. I want to leave you with some of key priorities proposed by the EANC that we hope to rally the democratic opposition against the PFDJ and seek endorsement for our plan for autonomous Dankalia within Eritrea. First, the proposed constitutional framework. If you go one more slide ahead. One more, please. That's it. Okay. I think so we spoke about the Afar model. If you come back to the Afar model. So the proposed constitutional framework called the Afar model, which were distributed to decentralize the current excessively centralized governance of Eritrea by PFDJ, to establish power-sharing constitution which distributes power between Eritrea's central government and Eritrea's 8 provinces. The Afar model received support from various Eritrean political leaders and individuals. So I shared the printout with you earlier, and I asked for your considered endorsement of it. Secondly, to establish a democratic system of governance in Dankalia as a regional state of Afar nation of Eritrea thus united towards establishing Parliament of Dankalia in exile in accordance with our people's right to exercise our democratic rights to our internal autonomy and self-determination. So we have copies of Ottawa Declaration that we also want to share with you. If Musa and Yusuf, if you can distribute the our declaration. It's called the Dankalia Declaration. If you can share that with our audience, please. So I want to leave you, brothers and sisters, as you have seen unprecedented human rights violations against the Afar in Eritrea. It is persistent. It is existential threat against the Afar people. We have seen this through presentation by United Nations special rapporteurs. We want you, those brothers and sisters who are present here, but also brothers and sisters who are joining us who can listen and see us through Facebook. We want you to consider the unprecedented human rights violation that is currently going on against the Afar people. And we also want you to consider our indigenous rights, our inalienable right to internal self-determination. We want you to support our rights as indigenous people, but more importantly, I want you to remember Eritrea's independence. When it was first conceived in Dankalia by our traditional leaders, by our Afar sultanates who fought for Eritrea for what it is today. The Afar sultanates, sultanates of Garifo, sultanates of Rahaita, these Afar sultanates single-handedly fought against the European colonization. If it wasn't for the Afar sacrifice, there would not be any land that's called Eritrea today. We want to make sure our solidarity and our commitment to Eritrea's sovereignty. We don't want our brothers and sisters to misunderstand that the Afar are somehow against Eritrean independence or its sovereignty. We fully support. Without the Afar, like I said, there won't be any Eritrea. So I want to conclude by saying I want to thank all of you for joining us. We want you to consider the declaration, to support the Ottawa Declaration. It's called Dankalia Declaration. And we want you to consider the document called the Afar Model, that is not just the fulfillment of our rights in Dankalia, but it is the only way that we can see Eritrea transform itself from tyrannical dictatorship to full-fledged rule of law respecting constitutionally decentralized that respects the rights of Afar people and all Eritreans. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Ahmed.